First, thanks to Trish and to the ADA for inviting the National Copyright Unit to speak again, this year about OER. Like Derek said, I'm Jessica Smith. I'm from the National Copyright Unit, and I'll probably by what I always do is refer to the NCU. So as you know now, the NCU is the National Copyright Unit. Usually it'd be Delia up here speaking. Delia Brown is our National Copyright Unit Director. She is off gallivanting in very cold and snowy Washington, D.C. at the Open Policy Network meeting. And for everyone that knows her, you'll be perhaps entertained that at one point in time, she suggested that I bring a life-size poster of her and cart it around with me. That obviously did not happen at all. But I'm specifically here to speak about OER, so Open Educational Resources. These are gaining significant favor across the world as education systems grapple with increasing demand for resources, but they're matched by reductions in funding. So while I specifically mostly talk about Australia, this is a huge international movement. It's robust, and I'll give a couple of my favorite international initiatives that are occurring lately. So in the US, just in October of this past year, I believe, they passed they announced a new action plan to promote open education and to increase awareness and engagement. And underneath the action plan falls quite a few different initiatives and quite a bit of funding, so it'll be really interesting to see what all comes out of that action plan. And then in California, I believe in 2013, they passed the California textbook policy, in which they're looking at the 50 most widely used higher education textbooks, and they are producing open versions of those textbooks for free, I believe, in the online digital space, and then for a very small fee in hard copy format. In British Columbia and Canada, they're doing a very similar initiative, and they're doing the 40 most popular post-secondary courses, and creating open textbooks for those. In the EU, they have announced Opening Up Education, which is an initiative aimed to increase the use of digital technologies for learning and spur the development of OER and OER policies across the European Union. And then in the UK, there's been one city council that has announced a schools action plan that allows schools and teachers, if they produce resources in the course of their employment, they can actually release those resources under a Creative Commons license. And they actually strongly encourage the teachers to release the resources under a Creative Commons license. So there's certainly a lot going on in the international realm. Those are just a little bit of snapshot, just a little snippet. You can find out a lot more on our website or talk to anyone at the NCU or Baden. And like I said, I'm going to actually focus on Australia today, but there is certainly a whole lot going on. So first of all, Australia is a signatory to the Paris OER Declaration that was signed in 2012, and this calls on governments to openly license publicly funded educational materials. So we do have that obligation at the national level. So OER is one of the NCU's key priorities. It's something that we've been very passionate and strongly encouraging for years in the past, and we certainly will for years to come. We educate the education sector by giving quite a few presentations on OER and Creative Commons, and also providing advice on a daily basis to schools and teachers. We have a section on our website, the Smart Copying website, which is dedicated solely to Creative Commons and open educational resources. We get about 8,000 visits a month, and so we have quite a few teachers who are finding their way on there, and a large portion of these visits are to our Creative Commons and OER sections of the website. And they seem to be really interested in the Creative Commons information pack, which is geared towards schools and teachers specifically. And then also we have a very large list, an ever-increasing list of open educational resources on there. We also run the Copyright for Educators course on Peer-to-Peer University, and I know there are actually a few people at the conference today who have taken the course, and so that's really good to see. We run 2 sessions a year, and we educate about 120 learners through that platform, and there's 1 week that's solely dedicated to OER and Creative Commons. Recently, ASOC, which is now called COAG, passed an action which is approved for all Australian departments of education to license their website and any publications under a Creative Commons license. And so that was a big victory for the education sector. And we're working with Osgold at the moment to actually action that initiative. We also have a number of OER projects that we're working on. We're creating an Oer Toolkit, which will be a practical guide for curriculum developers. So it'll focus on how to use OER resources only, and those resources that they develop specifically for the curriculum. We're expanding our website to include references to all the international initiatives I've spoke about today, and also quite a few other OER toolkits that are starting to pop up around the world. And they're really practical guides on how schools and teachers and curriculum developers can actually use OER in their resources and in their teaching and learning materials. We're also working with OSGOL and a number of NGOs, as an example, UNICEF, to encourage them to sign up to preferably the CC IGO 3.0 license. We'll take any Creative Commons license, but that is what we're working with them on at the moment. And then we are also in the NCU working on researching and drafting a school sector OER policy. We've been working on that for a while, and hopefully it'll get a few more action steps underneath our belt here this year, and hopefully get that approved. So as of now, I've told you what we're doing and what we're working on, and equally as important is why we think this is important and why we think OER is a way forward for the education sector. So the NCU believes very strongly that resources that are created with public funds should be openly available and publicly available. We believe this is making reasonable use of taxpayers' money. Schools using OER will also help reduce their copyright fees, which are ever increasing, and schools and departments are, of course, always concerned about the money. And specifically in education, we have a problem where government resources, whenever they are used in the classroom, we do pay for those underneath the statutory licenses. But OER is certainly bigger than copyright fees alone, and it's much more about opening up resources and allowing schools and teachers and students to actually engage more with the materials and the learning resources. So with OER, if they're using openly licensed materials, they can frequently alter the material, they can build upon it. Teachers can individualize content for their classes and for specific students. And so it is more about engaging with the material, and it opens it up to a wider spectrum. So teachers can share with other teachers, they can share with other schools, and it doesn't have to be kept behind a password-protected internet, which is something that a lot of our schools really struggle with. And while it's opening up all this greater use and flexibility with the materials, it also significantly reduces the risk of copyright infringement. Of course, something that all of our schools are very, very concerned about. So despite all that is going on with OER, and we are, of course, very excited with all the developments, and we're going to continue to push for OER and the adoption of Creative Commons licenses, that is only one part of the solution for the education sector. OER complements the other part of the solution, which is the law reform that all of us have been involved in for the past couple of years. OER will solve some of the problems around reducing copyright infringements, as well as reducing copyright fees, and potentially opening up the material quite a bit more and allowing students to engage more with the material. But it will not solve the problem of our Copyright Act being outdated, inflexible, and confusing. So just for an example, something that teachers always struggle with and will not ever completely understand, showing an artwork on a screen in class is treated differently than showing a poem on the same screen. Schools are still paying millions of dollars in Australia to use freely available internet materials. A couple of examples, just making a copy of a Google map for a geography class in Australia would be remunable, so we would pay for that. Printing a free coloring sheet from our website for use in a kindergarten class, something else that we pay for. So we're spending quite a bit of money on stuff that we don't think that we should be paying for. The education sector is clearly on the record about being in favor of fair use and flexible exceptions. So OER complements, but it does not replace the need for law reform and flexible exceptions. As such, we will continue to ask the government to advance the ALRC recommendations. And that's all I have. Thank you.